He is a lover of what education can do for you, which is why I am so glad we have 40 high school students here today. What each student takes away today may be more valuable than what they've learned so far in school. You see, Dr. Carson believes athletes aren't the only ones who should get trophies for superior performance. 16 years ago, he and his wife started the Carson Scholars Fund, which provides scholarships for superior academic achievement. Approximately 5,000 scholarships have been awarded across all 50 states. For all we know, there may be a future Carson Scholar in this room. At 33, Ben Carson became the director of pediatric neurosurgery at Johns Hopkins University, a post he held until last year. He is credited with being the first surgeon to successfully separate conjoined twins at the head. Bill Clinton awarded him the Presidential Medal of Freedom. He has written 6 bestsellers, including his most recent, which we have at the book signing today, Our Nation, What We Can All Do to Save America's Future. Last year, President Obama selected him to give the keynote speech at the National Prayer Breakfast, during which he created a national stir by criticizing the Affordable Care Act. To say he is outspoken is an understatement. You'll find him on television talk shows, authoring newspaper columns, and lecturing globally. Conservatives love him and want him to run for president. There's even a website, Run Ben Run. Please join me now in welcoming Dr. Ben Carson.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you. Well, Candy and I are absolutely delighted to be here because, you know, we can be in our own backyard. We're always traveling. You know, started out yesterday, where were we? In Arizona. Tonight I'll end up in Chicago. And later on this week in Tallahassee, and then San Francisco, and this weekend to Italy. But nevertheless, we're here in our own backyard. And I gotta tell you, you know, we moved to Florida last year, largely for tax reasons, but but we absolutely love it here, especially in the summertime when there's nobody here. You know, this is absolutely spectacular. But I want to talk a little bit about many of the things that we talk about in our latest book, One Nation. And I just say something about me being an author. I never intended to become an author. But back in about 22 years ago, after the first set of conjoined twins, people started saying, you should write a book. And after about the 10th publisher came to me and said I should write a book, I said, maybe I should write a book. So I wrote the book, Gifted Hands, and then Think Big after that, and The Big Picture, and Take the Risk, all with professional co-writers. The last 2 books, America the Beautiful, and the current book, One Nation, I wrote instead with my wife, Candy. And both of those books became New York Times #1 bestsellers. So the moral of the story, write a book with your spouse. That's the best way to do it. But I want to talk about some of the things that I talked about in there. But I want people to understand that America is actually a good place. And why do I bring that up? Because if you look at the current AP course in American history that's being taught across this nation, there's like 2 sentences on George Washington. Incredibly inspirational figure. Nothing about Dr. Martin Luther King and many of the other great luminaries. Volumes on slavery and how evil we were. And volumes on what we did to Native Americans and how evil we were, and volumes on the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and just murderous intent of Americans and how they meddled so much in the world. And I don't even know how a student could finish a course like that and not want to go join ISIS. I mean, that's how bad it is. And it's funny, but it's very serious what's happening in our nation. And we need to be involved in what's going on. We can't just let people propagandize uninterrupted to our children, because our children are the most precious thing that we have. And we have to make sure that they're hearing the whole story and not someone's version of what should be done. Well, you know, as a child, my dream was to be a doctor. I just loved everything about medicine. Anything on television, Dr. Kildare, Dr. Casey, that kind of stuff, man. I was right there, even like going to the doctor's office. So it tells you I was strange as a kid. But it didn't matter. And I used to listen to the mission stories in church and Sabbath school, and they frequently featured missionary doctors who traveled all over the world, great personal sacrifice to bring not only physical but mental and spiritual healing to people. They seem like the most noble people on earth. I decided at age 8 that I would become a missionary doctor. And that was my dream until I was 13, at which time, having grown up in dire poverty, I decided I'd rather be rich. So at that point, missionary doctor was out and psychiatrist was in. Now, I didn't know any psychiatrists, but on TV they seemed like rich people. They drove Jaguars and lived in mansions and had these big plush offices, and all they had to do was talk to crazy people all day. And it seemed like I was doing that anyway. So I said, this is going to work out really well. Well, you know, as time went on, though, you know, it changed to different forms of medicine, but it was always something in medicine. And what an incredible privilege it is as a physician to deal with such an important thing as someone's health, someone's life. As an intern at Johns Hopkins, I remember being so impressed as I would walk into those wards. And I would see the CEO of this company and the president of this organization, crown prince, queen of this nation, in many cases dying of some horrible disease. And every single one of them would have gladly given every penny and every title for a clean bill of health. And you begin to realize how important your health is. And that is the reason that I rail against any system that takes the most important thing a person has, which is their health and healthcare, and puts it in the hands of somebody else. I just don't think that that's the way to do things. Now, that doesn't mean that I don't think that everybody should have healthcare. I was in the airport 2 days ago, and a lady came and sat down next to me, and she said, you know, I'm a Democrat, but I like you. I like a lot of stuff you have to say. But I don't understand why you don't want poor people to have health care. And I said, you've been listening to the propaganda. I said, I, more than anybody, want poor people to have good health care. You know, we spend more than twice as much per capita on health care in this nation than the next closest nation. And yet, look at the access problems we have, and look at the inefficiency and the cost. It's absolutely absurd. Can that be ameliorated and fixed? Of course it can, relatively easily, if we take it out of the political realm and just solve it with our common sense. That's really the key, and that's why I have been advocating things like health savings accounts, which we have a variety of ways of funding. But even for the indigent, by taking the monies that we apply to Medicaid and putting them into their health savings account over which they have control with their healthcare provider, it's going to create enormous efficiencies. SaveOurHealthcare.org, just go and read it when you get home. It shows you that there is a logical way to do it. We need to take this kind of stuff out of the political arena. It's not political. It affects every single one of us. And diseases don't care whether you're a Democrat or you're a Republican. We have to have important and efficient ways of dealing with them. When we do that, that's when we're going to start looking more like the United States of America. Now, one thing I will say before I go on, I'm not politically correct. So, you know, it's possible that I might say something that will offend someone. It will not be intentional. but I don't spend all my time, examining every word and every phrase to make sure that somebody isn't offended, because nowadays somebody's offended by almost everything. And it's absolutely absurd, and what we need to concentrate on is not unanimity of speech, but teaching people not to be offended over every little thing and not to be so hypersensitive. I think that's one of the real problems in our society today, and it will absolutely destroy us. There are those who spend all of their time driving wedges into any little crack to create a war. So we have a war on women, race wars, income wars, age wars, religious wars, you name it, there's a war on it. Did you hear what they said? Oh my God. To me, it's almost like we've become a whole society of people like you had in the 3rd grade on the playground who would run over to one guy and say, did you hear what he said about your mama? And then he goes over to the other one. Did you hear what they said? And they get joy out of watching it. But in some cases, they derive power because their only significance is in creating conflict and fanning the flames of conflict, rather than using our intellect together in a way to solve the real problems that we face today. Well, there were a lot of problems along the way in terms of me realizing my goal of becoming a physician. My parents got divorced early on. I was devastated. My mother only had a 3rd grade education, trying to raise 2 sons in the inner city. Dire poverty. Never money for anything. And I gotta tell you, I hated poverty. Some people hate snakes, spiders, and scorpions. I hated poverty. I said, this is wrong. I wasn't meant to be born into poverty. There's a mistake here. But there I was anyway. That was just the way it was. But I will tell you that my mother was an incredible person. She was one of 24 children, got married at age 13, and years later discovered her husband was a bigamist. There she was with only a 3rd grade education, but she never felt sorry for herself. And that was a good thing. The problem is she never felt sorry for us either. So, there was never any excuse that was acceptable to her. And in retrospect, that was probably the best thing that she did for us, not accepting excuses. Because if somebody will accept your excuse, then you can just wallow in the excuse. You don't have to do anything. You don't have to create anything. Just sit there and blame someone else. And that is a formula for continued failure, without question. Well, she was very distressed by the fact that I was a horrible student. I was what's known as the safety net in my class. No one had to worry about getting the lowest mark as long as I was there. So they were happy that I was there, but I really was very, very disturbed about it. But I did admire the smart kids. I would look at them and I would say, how can they know all these answers? They're the same age as I am. But they did know. And my mother didn't know what to do, and she prayed for wisdom, and God gave her the wisdom. At least in her opinion. My brother and I didn't think it was wise at all. I mean, turning off the TV, what kind of wisdom is that? As far as we were concerned, that was child abuse. And making us read 2 books apiece from the Detroit Public Library every single week and submit to her written book reports, which she couldn't read, but we didn't know that. And she put little check marks, highlights, underlines, and I was extremely unhappy. But, back in those days, you had to do what your parents told you. There was no social psychologist saying let the kid express themselves. So, you had to do it. And, but an interesting thing began to happen as I started reading those books. I began to know the answers. And the teacher would ask a question, and the smart kids would raise their hands, but I would say, I could answer that. And it got me excited. And I started reading all kinds of books. If I had 5 minutes, I had a book. My mother would say, Benjamin, put that book down and eat your food. I was always reading. And in the space of a year and a half, I went from the bottom of the class to the top of the class. Much to the consternation of all those students who used to call me dummy, who were now coming to me saying, Benny, how do you work this problem? And I'd say, sit at my feet, youngster, while I instruct you. I was I was perhaps a little obnoxious, but it sure felt good to say that to those turkeys. But you know, the other really cool thing was poverty didn't bother me anymore at that point. I didn't mind being poor, because as I read stories about people of accomplishment, I began to recognize that the person who has the most to do with what happens to you in life is you. It's not somebody else. And you can control it. You can decide what you want to do and how much effort you want to put into it. And I stopped listening to all the naysayers around me who were saying, well, you can't do this, and nobody's done this, and this is against you. And I said, hey, I don't have time for that, because I was getting myself prepared. And what a difference it makes. And that's one of the reasons that Candy and I spend so much of our time, effort, and resources trying to instill that in others. And when you go home, do look up Carson Scholars Fund. But one of the real key parts of the program is we put these reading rooms in all over the country. And, you know, we put them in all kind of places, but particularly we target Title I schools. There's a new one that's going to be put in here in Palm Beach County next month. I hope you'll hear more about that from another source. But a lot of those kids come from homes with no books, go to a school with no library. They're the ones who don't learn how to read well. They drop out of school. They become a real burden to themselves and to society. It doesn't have to happen. These reading rooms are places that no little kid would pass up the way they're decorated. They get points for the number of books they read, and they can trade them in for prizes. In the beginning, they do it for the prizes, but it doesn't take long before that translates into their academic performance. Those are people who are very unlikely to drop out of school. And we have to start thinking about things like this, because we are a compassionate society. But we have to understand what compassion really is. Compassion is not patting people on the head and saying, there, you poor little thing. I'm going to take care of you with food stamps and housing subsidies and free health care, and you just go over there and sit down and relax, and make sure you vote for me, though. You know, that is not compassion. Compassion is creating circumstances that allow people to use their God-given talents to move up in our society and become a part of the American dream. And we have to start realizing that again, because for every one of those young people who don't do that, who go down that path of self-destruction, that's one more person that you have to worry about, protect your family from, pay for in the penal system or the welfare system. One less tax-paying productive member of society who may discover a new energy source or a cure for cancer. We cannot afford to throw any of them away. They are all absolutely essential and vital to the well-being of this country. And recognize we only have, 320 million people. China's got over 1 billion. India has over 1 billion. We're competing with them on a world stage. We need every single one of our people. And unless we begin to think that way and recognize that we're all in the same boat, and if part of the boat goes down, the rest of it's going down too, then we're not going to survive. That's going to be the key. And it's going to require courage. I want to end with this thought, courage. Freedom is not free. It costs. And you think about all the people who have sacrificed in order that we could have the freedoms that we have today. And people have to be willing to stand up for what they believe in. We know, for instance, most of us, what it takes to move an economy, to get things moving, but we're afraid to talk about it. We know how to use our natural resources in a way that is safe to the environment, but we're afraid to talk about that. We know that an $18 trillion national debt is going to destroy the future of our children, we're so afraid to talk about that. Unless we're able to engage in conversation and get beyond the politics and not allow people to drag things into the political sphere, we will never succeed. The challenges that our nation face are not Democrat problems or Republican problems. They're American versus anti-American problems. And until the American people understand that, they will continue to be manipulated. We cannot allow that to happen. We're at the pinnacle of power. We're at the pinnacle. We, the people, are at the pinnacle of power. But we can't exercise that power unless we are well-informed and educated. And the founders of this nation said, our freedom and our system is dependent upon a well-informed and educated populace. Without that, the nature of the country will rapidly change. And that's one of the reasons that we just completed another manuscript, Candy and I, called One Vote. Completely nonpartisan, but helping people to understand what went into giving each one of us one vote and why it is so vital that we become educated and how we become educated, how we get to know who our representatives are and what their records are. Not what they said their records are, but what their actual records are, so that we can vote in an intelligent way, because I am convinced that the majority of people in this country are actually decent, logical people with common sense. They've just been beaten into submission and they've been manipulated. And if we can pull the veils off of people's eyes, we can once again be the kind of nation where we put the Constitution on the top shelf, where we stop picking and choosing which laws we want to enforce, where we stop picking and choosing which people we want to favor, where we raise a tide that lifts everybody, where we understand what true compassion is all about. And when we sing that national anthem, and we get to that last stanza, and it says, the land of the free and the home of the brave, we don't just allow those things to roll off of our tongue. We think about what it means, and we recognize that in America, we cannot be free if we're not brave. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm told that I'm supposed to answer some questions now. Okay.
Absolutely. If you have a question card ready and you'd like to ask a question, just hold up your card in the audience and one of our volunteers will pick it up and bring it up to the head table. Our first two questions will come from the students at Palm Beach Central High School, who have prepared for this, I believe. They are very bright kids.
Okay.
So if you would start off, the first student, say your name and ask your question.
Good afternoon, Dr. Carson. My name is Caroline Kinane, and I am from the Palm Beach Central High School debate team. As a Seventh-day Adventist, you received some criticism for your statements denying evolution and supporting the biblical story of creation. Candidate Mitt Romney had to answer questions about his Mormon beliefs, and John F. Kennedy had to assure the public that being Catholic was not a hindrance. You have always given credit to God for your success. With an African-American president elected twice, our country has obviously made progress on skin color. Are we becoming more tolerant of religion as well?
Actually, we're becoming less tolerant of religion right now. You know, our First Amendment guarantees freedom of religion, not freedom from religion. A lot of people don't understand what religion is.
You think I still need to ask that? Yeah.
And I'm always amused at the people who come to me and they say, you're a scientist, so how can you possibly believe that God created the earth and that the earth is 6,000 years old? Well, you know, I don't know how old the earth is. I've never said that it was 6,000 years old, but I do believe in the Bible. The Bible says in the beginning God created heaven and earth, period. Don't know how much time elapsed between the period and creation. But the other thing is, if God wanted to create something that already had age on it, he could do it. That's why he's God, and we're not. A lot of people don't understand that. If they can't understand it, then it can't possibly be. And, you know, I've asked Nobel Prize physicists, I said, explain to me, since you don't believe in God, how something came from nothing. Well, they can't quite explain that. I said, okay, never mind. I'm just going to give you that there's something. Okay, there it is. And now it explodes. And we have a perfectly organized solar system and universe. How did that happen? I said, you believe in the second law of thermodynamics, don't you? Entropy, things move toward a state of disorganization. So explain to me how there's a big explosion and everything's perfectly organized. And they say, well, I said, okay, no problem. I said, but basically what you're saying to me is if I blow a hurricane through a junkyard enough times over a long enough period of time, after one of them, there's going to be a perfectly formed 747 ready to fly, right? Well, you know, I said, I don't have any problem with that. I'm not going to denigrate you for believing that. That's where your faith is. That's where your religion is. You're welcome to it. I don't have that kind of faith, but you can have it. Not a problem.
Next question from the student.
Good afternoon, Dr. Carson. My name is Quentin Scruggs, and I'm from the Palm Beach Central High School debate team. The National Prayer Breakfast with President Obama certainly got you political attention. You said you received some racist hate mail after your criticism of certain administration policies. As the fourth serious African-American presidential candidate, if you decide to run, do you see racism decreasing in our country? Have most Americans come to accept that race is not an issue when it comes to our most important leaders? And for that matter, is our nation ready for a woman president?
Take that one.
Yeah. What I find fascinating is how many people, and I hope I don't get this question today, they say, President Obama has ruined it for any other black person to ever consider being president in the near future. I say, isn't he half white? But to answer the question, you know, racism is one of those things that you can find if that's what you're looking for. You know, if I tell you that a person that you don't know, I said, they're a horrible racist. They try to hide it, and you believe me, everything they say, you're going to say, aha, yeah, they are racist. Look at it. But if on the other hand, I say, this is a wonderful person. They have a heart of gold. They can say the same thing. You say, oh, yeah, I see how they have a heart of gold. You tend to see what you're looking for. And does it exist? Of course it does. As long as there are people with small minds, it will exist. But you don't have to let that be a big problem for you. My mother used to tell me when I was a youngster, if you walk into an auditorium full of racist, bigoted people, she said, you don't have a problem. They have a problem. Because you see, when you walk in there, they're all going to cringe and wonder if you're going to sit next to them, whereas you can go sit anywhere you want. And you know, that's kind of the way that I've led my life. If somebody wants to sit there and obsess about that, let them. There are too many important things to do, and that's the way we have to solve our problems.
We have two questions here considering, with regard to you running for office. One is, would you consider a third-party run for president, and could a third-party candidate win? And the other one is, would you consider a role as vice president if given the role of leading reform in the areas of insurance, poverty, health care, or education?
Okay. I would consider any role to help our nation move forward. You know, I am not wedded to any particular role. And that role could be just as an average American citizen who is raising the alarm bell and helping other fellow citizens to understand what's going on. God knows what that role will be, and I'm not wedded to any particular role, and I'm not particularly interested, to be honest. Why would anybody want to be president? I mean, have you noticed how old they look after just a short period of time? I mean, as far as I'm concerned, that is really a sacrifice. Nevertheless, if my fellow citizens called me to do it, I would, but it wouldn't be something that I would seek. I think it would be kind of stupid to want to do that. But as far as running as a third-party candidate, no, I would never consider such a thing. I think Ross Perot demonstrated the folly of that.
Sort of along the same lines. Can your home city of Detroit be fixed? Has anyone asked you to run for mayor?
No one's asked me to run for mayor because I don't live there anymore. But can it be fixed? Of course it can be fixed. You know, Detroit is like a microcosm of the United States. And, you know, it used to be the most prosperous city in the world, and now is the largest bankruptcy. And what happened? A lot of people want to blame the unions. They say the unions were greedy, but you know what? Unions do what unions do. They will gladly strangle the goose that laid the golden egg for one more egg. Not a problem. The people who were supposed to stop them were the automobile executives. But did they? Did they know what was going to happen? They do. You know, I sit on a number of corporate boards. I can tell you, these guys are smart. They have a 1-year plan, a 5-year plan, a 10-year plan. They look way down the road. And they knew what was going to happen if they continued all these concessions to the unions. But they also knew that they would have their golden parachute and be long gone by then. And isn't that what we're doing to the future of our children and our grandchildren right now? Just looking for what we can get out of the equation and not worrying about what happens to them? Thomas Jefferson said it was immoral to pass debt on to the next generation. We're passing it on to several generations, but we can fix it. We can stop the fiscal irresponsibility right now. We can shrink the size of government. The government does important things, but it does a lot of unimportant things. And we have thousands of government employees that retire every year. Just don't replace them. You do that for about 4 or 5 years, you'll get the government down to a size where it needs to be. You won't have so many excess people sitting around all day looking at porn or whatever they're doing, not having a job to do, and they can keep their big noses out of everybody's business. And then the other thing is, we have the most powerful economic engine the world has ever seen right here in America. All we have to do is let it loose and stop encircling it with new regulations every single week so that it can survive. And then we have absolutely absurd tax codes. We have the highest corporate tax rates in the world. And we sit there and criticize people for doing work overseas. Anybody who criticizes people for doing that doesn't understand business, doesn't understand capitalism. People don't go into business to support the government. They go into business to make money. A wise government creates an environment that is conducive for the growth of business. We have the ability to do that.
When you talk about political correctness and what it's done to us in this country, what do you think of the controversy over renaming the Washington Redskins?
The controversy over renaming the Redskins, I wrote an op-ed piece on that not long ago. I think it's absolutely absurd. You know, we have gotten to the point where we spend so much time nitpicking everything. If we're going to change the name of the Washington Redskins, what other teams do we have to change? You know, we need to stop being so hypersensitive. And in the book, One Nation, there's a whole chapter on hypersensitivity and those who benefit from stoking the fires of hypersensitivity. We need to get beyond it. We need to learn how to be able to laugh and have fun again and not pick at everything. I guarantee you, I can find something wrong with virtually anything. I can pick at my own name, Dr. Ben Carson. I can find something wrong with that. I can find something wrong with this one. You know, this is just absolute absurdity. And as long as we continue to cater to that, we fail to focus attention on the things that are important, we will never get anywhere.
Do you think there should be changes to our gun laws as a matter of public health and public safety?
Well, I'm a very strong believer in our Constitution, in every aspect, including the Second Amendment. And I would never restrict people's ability to have guns. However, I do think it is smart for us to have intelligent conversations about guns and look for ways that we can keep guns out of the hands of mentally ill people and out of criminals without infringing upon the rights of the citizens to have weapons. So it's a delicate balance, but it's not of you get in this corner and I'll get in this corner issue. Like every other issue, we should be able to discuss it, but we need to discuss it with the Second Amendment right there on the table in front of us to make sure that we don't violate it.
What are your thoughts on medical marijuana?
Well, let me tell you about marijuana. And multiple medical studies have confirmed regular marijuana users whose brains have not fully matured lose an average of 8 IQ points. Now, do we really have that much excess IQ? I don't think we do, quite frankly. And so there are ways to use it in a medical way. We can extract the active ingredients. We can put them into pill form. There are a lot of things that can be done in a logical fashion. But I don't think that we should ever, particularly as a pediatric neurosurgeon, I'm very sensitive to anything that damages the brain. And be it excessive alcohol, marijuana, variety of things. We should be doing it in an intelligent way. So medical marijuana, under the appropriate circumstances, I don't have any problem with. But legalizing something that we know is harmful to the developing brain, let me put it this way. If I were interested in destroying a nation, that's what I would do.
How do you think we should deal with the childhood obesity problem in our country?
The childhood obesity problem is largely secondary to lack of caloric output. I find it fascinating. There's so many people who said, I don't eat that much. I have a gland problem. They do have a gland problem. It's a salivary gland, and you have to learn how to control it, I mean, it just doesn't come without, it's not spontaneously generated. What we have to do is concentrate more on making sure that our young people don't sit around all day playing video games. And it is a big problem in our nation. And it has multiple implications. Before I retired last year, I met a lot of parents would come to me and they would say, is it okay that I start my kid on this medication? They've been diagnosed with hyperactivity disorder. And I say, well, before you do that, let me ask you a question. Can they watch movies? Oh yeah, they can watch movies all day. I said, can they play video games? Oh yeah, all day and all night. I said, I want you to try something. I want you to wean them gradually off of those things and substitute time with you, reading and discussing what's going on. And if they're still having a problem, then start it on. Almost invariably, a few months later, they come back to me and say, it's a different kid. Because there is an epidemic of attention deficit disorder, but the diagnosis is inappropriately applied to the children. It should be applied to the parents because they need to spend more time with the children.
What do you think think of charter schools? And have you put any reading rooms there in any charter schools?
Yes, we have put reading rooms in charter schools. I love charter schools. I think, again, one of the things in medicine, and one of the reasons that I encourage physicians, engineers, scientists to go into the political arena is because we're trained to make decisions based on evidence, as opposed to ideology. What we have in Washington are a bunch of ideologues. You know, something doesn't work, they say, well, you just didn't do enough of it, we just got to do more of it, rather than actually analyzing what does work and what doesn't work. What we have seen is that charter schools work extremely well. The kids who go there have a much higher graduation rate, much higher college matriculation and college finishing rate. Aren't we supposed to be trying to increase opportunities and increase the educated people in our country? Why would anybody be against that unless there was some special interest group behind them? And that's what I find about virtually everything that goes on in our society that doesn't make sense. It's because there's some special interest group behind them. There's only one special interest group as far as I'm concerned, and that's the American people.
With all of the political discussions going on today, both domestically and foreign, Ukraine, Israel, Syria, Ebola, what issue do you think is the most troublesome for our country?
Well, I think one of the big problems right now is that there is a vacuum of leadership. We are the pinnacle nation in the world. We are the world's superpower. There are responsibilities that come with that. You don't just sort of sit back, relax, and wait for something to happen. And right now, the world is like a third grade classroom with no teacher in it. And a lot of stuff is going on. It's continued to get worse unless we lead. I think the threat from ISIS is an incredibly important threat, particularly the fact that we have not sealed our southern border, which will allow people to come in here. The fact that there are people with American and Canadian passports and European passports who can come and go pretty much as they please in our country, who can associate themselves with those who are trying to destroy us. You know, we can't just sit around and talk about this stuff. You know, we have to be very serious. And, you know, I know a lot of military leaders, and I know a lot of people involved in covert activities in our nation, and I can tell you something, they are very smart people. And we have to let them do what they do best, and that is get rid of our enemies before our enemies get rid of us.
Last question. What convinced you to retire from a successful medical career?
Well, I must say that, you know, it was such an incredible privilege to be able to intervene in the lives of so many people. And there are aspects of it that I do miss. But fortunately, I still get to see a lot of my patients. I operated on so many thousands of people that no matter where we go throughout the country, there are some of my patients there. I remember last year on my birthday, I was in Alabama, and there were about 2,000 people, and at the end we were having a Q&A, and a lady way back in the back stood up and she said, "Doctor, 20 years ago I gave birth to a little girl with such severe cranial deformities. Everybody said, just let her die. And you were the only one who disagreed and would do something. And I just want to wish you a happy birthday, and here's my 20-year-old daughter to present you with a cake." You know, those are the kinds of things that really make it all worthwhile. But someone told me that neurosurgeons die early. And I didn't believe it, so I wrote down the names of the last 10 that I know who died, calculated the average age of death. It was 61. So I said, when I turn 61, if I'm still alive, I will retire. I did. I thought that retirement meant learning how to play the organ, playing golf, learning new languages, but I think that God had a different plan. And, our nation is as sick as any patient I've ever seen, and we have a job to try to fix it. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.